What if the greatest minds of history weren't misunderstood because they were wrong, but because they made everyone question their own certainties? Philosophers, scientists, and even artists who dared to think beyond the conventional have often found themselves in a strange position, not celebrated for their brilliance, but distanced from society. It's a paradox that runs deep through history. Those who think the most critically are often the most isolated. But why does this happen? Why does society shy away from intellect? The key to understanding this paradox lies not in the ideas themselves, but in the discomfort they create. The more profound the thought, the more it can disrupt the status quo. It's easy to be content with shallow answers to life's biggest questions. But the moment someone comes along with a deeper, more unsettling truth, it forces everyone to question everything they know, and that's not always comfortable. Imagine you're walking into a room full of people and suddenly someone speaks with a level of intellect that challenges everything you hold as self-evident. It's not about whether they're right or wrong. It's about how their very presence makes you question your own understanding. This is the mirror effect. Think about this. When someone physically stronger than you walks into the room, there's no real threat. You might admire them or feel inspired by their physical prowess, but you don't feel personally attacked. When someone wealthier or more successful enters, you might feel envy, but again, you don't feel threatened in your core sense of self. But when someone more intelligent walks into the room, suddenly, things shift. It's not just about their knowledge, it's about how their intellect makes you feel about your own thoughts and abilities. In the world of ideas, intelligence isn't just a measure of knowledge, it's a reflection of our sense of self. Our identity is built, in part, on our ability to understand and make sense of the world. So when someone challenges that understanding, it's not just a disagreement. It's a challenge to who we are. And that's why intellectuals often find themselves isolated. People don't like being made to feel small or inadequate. And when you force them to confront their own ignorance, that discomfort can lead to rejection. Let's think back to some of the greatest thinkers in history. Socrates, for example, was condemned to death not for being wrong, but for challenging the foundational beliefs of Athenian society. His relentless questioning made people uncomfortable, not because his arguments lacked merit, but because they made everyone question their own certainties. Galileo faced persecution not because he was lying, but because his discoveries threatened to upend the worldview of the time. The core issue isn't that deep thinkers are wrong or arrogant. It's that their very thoughts expose the limitations of the people around them. This is why, throughout history, society has often resisted intellectuals. Their ideas challenge the comfortable and familiar, and that's an uncomfortable place for most people to be. Psychologists have a term for this phenomenon: cognitive dissonance. When we are faced with information that contradicts our beliefs, it creates an internal conflict. We feel uncomfortable, unsettled. Instead of embracing the new idea, our brains work overtime to reject it, to make it fit within our existing framework. This explains why so many people instinctively resist the ideas of deep thinkers. It's not about the content of the ideas. It's about how those ideas make us feel. This resistance is amplified in group settings. Think about the last time you were in a group conversation. If someone brings up an idea that's too deep, too complex, or too different from what everyone else is saying, how does the group react? The conversation quickly shifts, right? People might laugh it off or change the subject, not because the idea is wrong, but because it threatens the group's harmony. In a social setting, the priority isn't truth, it's conformity, and that's where deep thinkers get left behind. This dynamic doesn't just exist in casual conversations, it plays out in larger societal structures too. People are often more drawn to certainty than truth. They prefer leaders who offer simple answers to complex problems, even if those answers are flawed. Charismatic figures who give bold, sweeping statements often gain more followers than intellectuals who speak in nuanced, measured tones. Why is this? Simply put, it's easier to feel secure in the familiar than it is to confront uncomfortable truths. And this dynamic is rooted in our evolution. Historically, survival depended on fitting into a group. Those who challenged the group's norms were often ostracized or worse. It wasn't about being right, it was about maintaining the social fabric. In modern times, this instinct persists. We're wired to seek belonging, not intellectual challenge. So, when an intellectually superior person walks into the room, they inadvertently force everyone else to confront their own shortcomings. And that's where the resistance begins. This is the crux of the issue. Deep thinkers make people uncomfortable because their intellect forces others to face the gaps in their own understanding. It's easier to reject the thinker than to confront one's own ignorance. And this is where the paradox gets even more interesting. Modern technology has only amplified this effect. In the digital age, we're bombarded with short, digestible pieces of content. Social media thrives on sound bites, not deep discussions. The more intellectual someone is, the harder it is to reduce their ideas to a catchy post or viral video. This is why influencers, with their easy-to-consume messages, often rise to prominence, while intellectuals struggle to find a wide audience. Now, what does this mean for those of us who think deeply? Should we simply stop sharing our thoughts? Should we water down our ideas to fit in? Absolutely not. But understanding this psychological resistance is key to navigating the world as a deep thinker. Deep thinkers often find comfort in solitude. It's not a punishment, it's a sanctuary. Schopenhauer, a philosopher known for his unflinching outlook on life, suggested that intellectuals should embrace solitude. It's not about avoiding people. It's about embracing the freedom to think, to explore, and to create, without the constant pressure to conform. Solitude gives deep thinkers the space to process the world on their own terms, without the noise of societal expectations. And it's in this solitude that they often find their greatest insights. Schopenhauer argued that true happiness comes not from fitting into society's mold, but from embracing our own unique path. This is where the strength of the deep thinker lies, not in their ability to win the approval of others, but in their willingness to stay true to their own understanding, even when the world around them doesn't understand. In the end, the struggle of the deep thinker isn't a personal failing. It's a product of a society that values comfort over truth. And while that can be isolating, it's also what makes deep thinking so valuable. Because in a world full of easy answers, those who dare to ask the hard questions are the ones who will ultimately shape the future.